Good evening, everyone. Good evening. Today is Thursday, April 27, 2023, and we are here at the Transportation Commission meeting. My name is Bridget Obikoya, and I am the Transportation Commission Staff Liaison. This meeting is being recorded, so please turn off your mics and Teams when you are not speaking. Before we start with the agenda items, are there any citizen comments on matters not on the agenda? Hearing none, I will start with the first agenda item and then turn the meeting over to Chairman Slatt. The first item on the agenda, sorry, we're having a little bit of a technical difficulty, is the Vision Zero Transportation Safety Equity Analysis with Christine Baker. But before we get into that, I'll turn it over to Chairman Slatt. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Obukoya. I only have one thing, and it is a very sad thing, and that it is Commissioner Brose's last meeting with us. She has finished out 2 full terms on the commission, so 6 years. It is not going to be the same without Commissioner Brose, who has been my rock reliably at meetings and willing to take on site plan review and always having something insightful and useful to share on each agenda item. So it is a sad day for me, but it has been an absolute blessing to have Commissioner Brose on the commission, and I wish her great enjoyment with her additional hours each month to do with as she pleases.
Thank you, Chairman Slatt. It's been a real honor to be a part of this commission and to just see what impact we have in the work that's actually happening in the county and how we can make a difference. So thank you. It's been wonderful to be a part of this team as well. So I don't say I'll never be back because there's lots more going on in the county, but I'll take some time off. Thanks.
And with that, we can move into the first agenda item.
Hi, this is Christine Baker with the Vision Zero program. And sorry I can't be there in person tonight. I have little kids that it's hard to get to bed without me. So I appreciate the opportunity to be here virtually. So I'm here to give you a quick update on the 2022 Vision Zero annual report, just a couple highlights since I'm here. And then we'll jump into the transportation safety equity analysis as the main item. So now that we've had a few years of experience under our belt with Vision Zero, we can more distinctly describe the yearly cycle we have for our Vision Zero program. And this has kind of helped us, confirm the reporting periods and kind of fall into a nice groove. Typically late fall through early spring, we'll focus on planning and programming. And then from spring to fall, we're working on implementation of transportation projects and through construction and repaving. We will release the annual Vision Zero report in April, which covers our progress and metrics from the previous calendar year. So we're focusing on calendar year from here forward. And we'll also have our open house in April, along with the annual safety feedback engagement, which we are wrapping up at the end of this month. And that's specifically to learn about experiences and needs from the community, do a check-in and see how we're doing, and make sure that not only is the infrastructure getting safer, but that people feel safer as well. Then we'll release the mid-year report in October, which covers activities within the calendar year to date, and have our meeting of the Vision Zero external stakeholders group in October as well to get feedback and help with that program steering from our external stakeholders. And then, of course, programmatic safety work like crash hotspots, the Hydrene network audits, critical crash reviews, community request response, collaboration and communication happens all year round. And the high injury network's updated every 3 years, and hotspots are identified every 2 years. So I think this helps just kind of give a nice synopsis of what we're doing. And then when you look at the 2022 program highlights, some things I just wanted to point out were with our partners like Arlington Transportation Partners, Arlington County Police, APS, we've hosted over 80 classes and events. Oh, and also our public safety crew. Over 80 classes and events. We hosted our critical crash campaign last year, and we're going to do the same thing later this year. We piloted safety analysis in the multimodal transportation analysis process for site plans, which has given us some cool lessons learned about how to better integrate safety and crash analysis into the site plan process. So we're going to take those lessons learned and apply them more this year. We implemented 13 and planned 14 school slow zones and school zone retrofits. We published the toolbox, which we presented to you all on earlier this year. We added a section within our report a problem tool to report construction issues or block sidewalks, and so far have already responded to 237 requests, or that was last year, from I think July to the end of the year. So really trying to ramp up our ability to help make construction areas safer for people walking and biking, especially. We collaborated with VDOT on 11 small scale projects and 1 speed limit reduction. We reduced speed limits on 6 roadways that on county-owned roads. So now there are no county-owned roadways with a speed limit higher than 30 miles per hour, which was a great benchmark to hit. And we also added 40 leading pedestrian intervals, no right on reds. Those tools are coupled together to enhance pedestrian safety at intersections for crossing. We built 11 quick build and 7 safety-driven capital projects and installed over 3.8 miles of new or improved bike lanes. So overall, we're doing everything we can from all these different angles to try to address safety. And we did have fewer severe fatal crashes in 2022. But as you can see, we see a lot of fluctuation in crash years. So we'll keep looking forward to hopefully that trend going down. As I mentioned, we have our high injury network that identifies streets within the county that have a relatively high number of serious or fatal injury crashes. In the Vision Zero Action Plan, we commit to updating that every 3 years. So we just completed our update for 2023, and we looked at 2018 to 2022 crash data. And we applied a sliding scale methodology, and we weighted crashes by severity, as well as normalized by the corridors by functional classification. We excluded any interstates and ramps, and using this methodology, we captured about 52% of injury crashes on only 6.8% of the county's roadways. So this is our new high injury network, and you can see we also didn't include Route 50. We are still collaborating with VDOT, doing lots of work to help improve safety on Route 50, but it didn't, for the sake of the analysis, we didn't want to lose out on looking at some of these other roads by including that corridor. And we also, have I-66 and 395 and GW Parkway as areas where we could advocate, but they're not in the high injury network. So we'll start safety audits on these corridors in the summer. And we have a new format for the audits that'll be up on the website. And we will also provide a schedule of when the timing will be to tackle these audits over the next 3 years. So very exciting to have a new methodology and this new network to start working from. And so with that, as I think we've talked about this before, but again, our program is maturing a lot. And so we're kind of understanding a little bit more about what our program looks like and being able to communicate that. And I found this slide to be really helpful, that we have a lot of responsive work that we are doing to crashes, like critical crash follow-up. Every time there's a fatal or severe crash, we follow up as an interdepartmental team to see what we can do from an engineering or education standpoint to address those. We We have our hotspot and Hydri network programs, and we address safety concerns through the community reporter problem tool. But then we have this proactive side, and this is where we're really starting to ramp up, and that's systemic improvements. So finding one safety issue in one location and then trying to identify and improve other similar locations. We do community education, which is proactive, and then there's the equity component. And that's performing an analysis of transportation safety issues countywide to identify and address areas or people who are disproportionately affected by crashes. And that's what I'm here to talk to you all about tonight, is this equity analysis that we have worked on over the past a little more than a year as an interdepartmental team. So one of the 6 goals of the Vision Zero program is to prioritize transportation safety investment equitably in our communities. So when we developed the Vision Zero action plan, we compared some equity indicators to crash data to see kind of what those imbalances look like. And findings did show a rough relationship between crashes and census block groups that either were more racially diverse or had lower income levels. So to learn more, that we added an action item to the Vision Zero action plan specifically to equity analysis, and that was item A4. And it was to identify the inequitable impacts of transportation on safety in Arlington County communities and integrate that work with the countywide efforts to further our county's equity resolution and the realizing Arlington's commitment to race, the race strategic framework. So that was what really launched this effort. So we convened an interdisciplinary internal project steering team, which helped us to really refine that scope of work, because it first started out as a mapping exercise. And then as we started to learn more, we wanted to get more people involved. So we brought in this really great team that had people from a bunch of different departments. And we realized this was our first investigation into transportation safety with that equity lens. So as we got deeper and deeper into it, we kind of refined the scope, and then we, after doing a lot of analysis, brought a consultant team on board. We work with Tool Design and Fur and Peers to help quality check a lot of our work, as well as help us package it up and bring it, to the community in a really nice public-facing document, which hopefully you've had a chance to look at. And I think it really does a great job of communicating what we've done. So as a starting point, we defined equity emphasis areas, and that was to focus on potentially underserved neighborhoods. So defining equity emphasis areas really let us explore the disproportionate impacts of crashes on neighborhoods with lower incomes or higher Black, Indigenous, and people of color populations, because we know people within these demographics have experienced inequitable outcomes in other social realms before. So to maintain consistency with other county equity initiatives, the equity emphasis areas we worked with were identified as part of Arlington Transit's Title VI requirements and guidelines for Federal Transit Administration funding recipients. So we use those Title VI block groups, and they're based on 2 separate criteria. One of the criteria is blocks with a Black, Indigenous, or people of color population of 38.5% or more. And then the other is block groups where the threshold for the Title VI is 17.5% or more of households have median income of 50% or $50,000 or less. But we refined that threshold to be 50% or more of households in the block group with a median income of $50,000 or less, because that helped us to prioritize neighborhoods with lower incomes. We had a lot of catchment with the 17.5% threshold, but when we brought it to 50%, it really helped us to focus more in on the neighborhoods, with lower income. So then looking at the equity emphasis areas, we looked at crashes from 2017 to 2022, and we did find that equity emphasis areas experienced almost twice as many crashes per square mile than the county as a whole. So that helped to really confirm that there was an inequity there. We also assessed the origin of drivers. So we looked at the zip codes from the drivers on the crash reports. I know a zip code is not always a great level of or geography to conduct an analysis like this, but that information was readily available in the police crash report data set, which would allowed us to do this analysis. So that's why we worked with the zip code. But the intent was to identify origin patterns and determine how local and regional trips kind of impact crashes. And knowing where people involved in crashes are coming from really helps us to better direct resources to prevent crashes. And what really stood out to us in this analysis was that people from 22204 were disproportionately involved in crashes. And we did see a lot of overlap with the equity emphasis areas and the 22204 zip code. We also analyzed the intersection of crash factors with socioeconomic, roadway, and other built environment variables to identify crash trends and at-risk locations, both countywide and specifically in equity emphasis areas. And this was called our systemic analysis, where we try to see what issues are kind of common and identify those risk factors and address them before crashes happen. And understanding, you know, the existence or absence of certain factors influence crashes helps us to make those proactive safety improvements. And the top 10 crash trends in equity emphasis areas that we found were very often involving pedestrians, left turn conflicts, and land uses, like specifically schools or neighborhoods. So that was another way where we got to learn a little bit more about what types of issues we were seeing in certain areas in the county. We also examined community requests. And that was, community reported safety concerns that either came in through the request for service portal, inquiries to the county board, through the ART or WMATA service portals, or applications to the Arlington neighborhood program that related to transportation safety, or applications to our neighborhood complete streets program. And so we use this community request data when we make decisions about roadway changes, as well as when we time and prioritize changes. So it's really important that requests that are coming in accurately reflect the demographic makeup of the county and reflect neighborhoods within the county. So community requests we saw were really underrepresented in equity emphasis areas as well. And then the last thing we looked at was transportation-related injury records by demographic characteristics to look at imbalances in hospitalizations. And we looked at that kind of in comparison to countywide census data. And we used Virginia Hospital Center data because that was the only hospital that let us get some of their data, which was really great. It's formed a really nice partnership with Virginia Hospital Center, but we do recognize that we have a limited sample size when we were looking at this information. And also our crash reports don't include race or ethnicity data, which makes it really difficult to understand the race or ethnicities of people involved in crashes. So analyzing this crash-related injury data allowed us to kind of attempt to fill this research gap and learn a little bit more. And one thing that really popped when we looked at the research was that Black or African-American individuals were overrepresented in crash-related hospitalizations, specifically for vehicle crashes. So that was another imbalance that we wanted to look into a little bit more because it stood out pretty prominently to us. So overall, we did our analysis and we had the key findings that I just kind of ran through in each of the different analysis areas. And that led us to a set of 10 action items. And the intent of those action items is to truly elevate equity emphasis areas for safety analysis, for project prioritization, for public engagement, education, and proactive safety improvements. And then we also wanted to have a plan for assessing our progress and reduce those inequities over time. So quick run through the action items. One of the overall goals and actions is to reassess proportionalities of crashes in equity emphasis areas over time. But the 10 action items include updating and quality checking our equity emphasis areas as new data becomes available. Because if we're using equity emphasis areas as a basis for analysis and for prioritization and infrastructure, we want to make sure that it's using the best data possible. We also are prioritizing safety analysis and improvements and projects in equity emphasis areas, improving safety at intersections, driver speeds, and pedestrian infrastructure within equity emphasis areas, hosting a public safety campaign that encourages behavior change for all road users, and that will include education and messaging. We'll monitor and evaluate capital safety improvements on corridors along equity emphasis areas, specifically Route 50 and Columbia Pike. Both have or will be receiving significant capital safety improvements in the next few years. So we want to make sure that we see change following those improvements. Promote consistent safety messaging, infrastructure, and policies with regional partners, and that'll help us understand, because we did find in the origin analysis that a lot of people involved in crashes in Arlington aren't actually from Arlington as well. So making sure that there's consistent messaging across the region will help us to achieve our safety goals in Arlington specifically. We're also going to focus traffic safety and Vision Zero outreach in equity emphasis areas and apply an equitable engagement checklist to Vision Zero and other transportation outreach. So by tracking the progress over time, we're committing to reduce and rectify disproportionalities. In this, the tracking metrics show you kind of, we're going to look at the percentage of projects, community requests, outreach events held in equity emphasis areas, reducing crashes, as well as reducing speeds through before and after analysis in equity emphasis areas, looking at our estimated reach of campaigns, conducting regular check-ins with regional Vision Zero partners, and increasing engagement with historically underrepresented groups are ways that we're going to look back and reflect on, how we're doing. And the intent is to do this in correlation with the 2025 Vision Zero Action Plan update. So that'll be coming up in a couple of years. So I think the bottom line here is that the analysis confirmed that there are neighborhoods in Arlington that have historically been overrepresented in crash data and underrepresented in responses to transportation-related safety requests, or in submitting those requests to us. And the recommendations are here to be proactive in addressing infrastructure needs with that equity lens, to create a platform to prioritize safety projects in our underserved neighborhoods, and to ensure that reporting channels are clear and accessible to all community members. Anyone can find a reported problem and report that problem. And I think it's important to also recognize that we are going to continue to prioritize safety projects that reduce fatal and severe crashes all over. This analysis just integrates equity into that prioritization process to ensure there's no undue burden on any of Arlington's community members. And so that's really what we're here to do, and we're excited to take the next steps, moving our action items forward, and hopefully achieve these outcomes. And I know this has been a hot topic this week. There's been a New York Times article that came out talking about this exact issue nationwide. So this is a great way to put a local lens on a national problem and identify ways where we can hopefully start to progress. So with that, I will take any questions. Thank you so much.
Great, thank you very much. While other commissioners get their hands up or whatever, I will say I'm particularly interested in this hospital crash data set. Can you talk a little bit about, it has a very high other race or unknown compared to everything else. Do you or does the hospital have a sense of, is that a lot of other race, or is that a lot of unknown, or do we really just not know in that hospital data?
So I believe, sorry, I will share that again so folks can see it. I know that sometimes, I believe it has to be reported by the individual. So sometimes it might be other if they don't get that information. And I did want to acknowledge too that the ethnicity data is separate from the race data, and we didn't highlight that specifically because there wasn't a big imbalance there. But we do, mention that within the report itself. And so, yeah, I think the reason the other shows up higher is because sometimes they don't get the information. And also the categories are fairly limited, where it's white, Black or African American, Asian, and then this is just how they had it in their data set. Unfortunately, it didn't go a little deeper.
Great, thank you.
Mhm.
Commissioner Theo?
Yes, I guess following up on Chairman Slat's question about hospital data, what has been the, I guess, the problem or the holding back of retrieving or accessing data from other local hospitals? For example, like GW Hospital, is it like university data sharing policy that's sort of the roadblock for us accessing that sort of thing?
I believe that is the problem. Sometimes it's just the lack of responsiveness. I know they're very busy, so sometimes it's not, a priority for someone at an emergency center to respond to the county government request. But we have been pushing to get contacts and be able to get in. And I think we actually did start to make progress with GW, where they said that it's possible. That we just had to go through some kind of release process. So we're starting to navigate that as well.
Commissioner Brose?
Yeah, I think it would also be interesting as a data point to overlay. I'm looking at the vehicle crash patients slide. The percentage of Black or people of color actually followed by police or whatever the conversation is, meaning are they in crashes because they're driving while Black and the police are coming after them, kind of thing. I mean, is there some corollary between the number of Black people, let's say, engaged in altercations with police versus not? I don't know. It just strikes me as that's one of the things that we're looking at overall in equity these days as well. So just a thought.
Sure, that's a great question. We do have access to I forget the exact name, but it's the police portal where you can look at the outcomes of traffic stops. And there's nothing in that data to indicate that that would be the case in Arlington specifically.
Okay.
I don't know if they were coming in from an outside jurisdiction, what that would look like, because our data wouldn't speak to that. But that is something that we have cross-checked. And yeah.
Great,
Great
thanks.
question, though. Thank you.
Commissioner Lanzalme?
There, this one works. I'm a little disturbed at the chart on your slide 4 that really shows there's really no change over how many years that showed. Yeah, from 2015 to 22, basically the trend line is flat. It goes up, it goes down, it goes up, it goes down. But for both crashes and fatalities, there's really hasn't, unfortunately, been much in the way of a change. When do we hope that we'll start seeing the trends going down? And we're not the only jurisdiction that sees this. DC is apparently in the same boat. But what are we not doing? What are we missing that this isn't changing, despite all of this data that we're getting, and certainly the intention is there to fix this, but it's not happening according to this data.
That's a great question. And I think you're right. Sometimes it takes a few years for some of our improvements to really start taking effect, or some of our projects to get programmed and installed. I see Dan's hands up, and I know you have a lot to say on this. So I'll just quickly mention, we do our critical crash reviews every quarter. And what is really challenging is when we meet and we talk as a group and we look through every crash that resulted in a severe or fatal outcome, and so much of it is weird things. It'll be a circumstance where someone was on their hands and knees like painting something next to the parking lot and was hit, or someone accidentally put their car in reverse. And so we're finding a lot of it is behavior related. There are many instances where we do see opportunities for, potential engineering improvements to help outcomes. But the behavior element is going to be our biggest challenge, and unfortunately, a big factor in many of the severe crashes that we see on the network. So we're going to keep plugging from both angles, from the education side as well as the engineering side, because we know both are truly important in this effort. And Dan, I'll let you jump in.
Thanks, Christine. And I have to apologize for
Can I
not
follow
being
up?
there in person as well. I just came from coaching 14 10-year-olds, so I hopped on as soon as I could. But I think Christine captured a lot of it. I want to also say that, we did have our annual meeting last night, and a lot of the things that we presented in the annual report and at the annual meeting show where at specific locations we've done things and we see the crash trends going down. So we know that doing things actually helps improve the conditions. But this is where the systemic part of this analysis that Christine talked about is really so important, because the systemic analysis is something that is proactive, right? And it's widespread. So, for this initial phase of looking at the systemic safety, what we're doing is we're focusing on those emphasis areas. And in those emphasis areas, there's about, over 500 intersections that we'll be looking at. So we'll be looking at those in detail and looking at the low hanging fruit of how we can incrementally improve safety. We're not going to be able to completely rebuild 500 intersections, but we'll be able to look for, are there adequate signage? Are there adequate markings? Is lighting okay? Is there proper sight distance? So we can do things that on a broad scale help reduce risk in a broader broader area. And so that's one of the big components of this analysis. And again, it's kind of our real entry part of doing that. We've done some other systemic things in the past that have been more simple. A good example is, we put stop bars at every intersection that's stop controlled. This will kind of walk us more towards wider scale implementations that will help us hopefully see that those severe and fatal crashes are reduced. And also coupled with the analysis that Christine mentioned in terms of the speed reductions, that's another key component that we're still working through. That again, not necessarily reducing the opportunity for a crash, but reducing risk and the severity. So that's a
Yep.
great question. Hopefully we
Yep.
were able to answer that.
Thank you. That's good to know. Little follow-up. Have you looked at other jurisdictions? Like, for example, Jersey City has had tremendous success. Apparently, they've had no fatalities on their their controlled streets, not their interstates or their Jersey dot streets. But on their streets, they've had 0 fatalities. And apparently, it's been more than just 1 year. And they're urban the way we are. It's dense. Anyway. It has street networks not much different than ours, I think. Have we looked at those other jurisdictions to see why they're having such success? What they're saying?
Yes, and I can say specifically with Jersey City, we were at NACTO conference last fall and spoke specifically with staff there, and really their approach is very similar to our approach that we're undertaking. What they've been doing is they've kind of played a long game in terms of, as they go through and repave, they bring things up to a higher standard. They look for those, they do daylighting, which is basically one of the things that we were talking about in terms of, improving sight distance and intersections. So those are like 2 big things that they do that we are, we have been doing some and we are doing more aggressively through, the Vision Zero Action Plan and through the plan that Christine presented tonight. So yeah, we have been in communication with them and we feel like our direction is the same direction. And again, we're always trying to get the best of what's out there to try to make sure that we are reaching that target by 2030 of 0 fatalities, 0 serious injuries by 2030 or before.
Thank you.
I think I saw Commissioner Coleman's hand up online earlier. Commissioner Coleman, did you have a question or a comment? Oh, all right. Well, guess not. On Commissioner Lantelmi's question, though, I do think we also have to recognize, I think we're to some extent fighting against some broader national trends that are kind of pushing the other way. We've seen, the cars on the road get heavier and bigger over the course of the last 10 years and shift in shape, from sedans to SUVs, and all the studies I'm seeing lately say that all of those things contribute to more severe injuries and more fatalities with pedestrians just due to how it changes the nature of the crash. So certainly not to excuse our lack of strong forward progress, but something to kind of keep in mind that if our crashes are not going up, that also does mean we're doing some good things, because what a lot of jurisdictions are seeing is it continue to skyrocket. Commissioner Hussain, did you have your hand up? Go ahead.
This is on, right? Okay. Yeah, I had a question regarding the community requests. Maybe I missed this in the presentation, but I was interested in why there is that discrepancy between community requests and why they're less common in the equity emphasis areas. Like, I guess I'm just trying to understand, like, what are the factors that are aside, like, why is it that those areas of low income and people of color are underrepresented, and what measures are being taken to kind of fill that gap? Because, like, again, I may have missed this, but like this, clearly there's an underrepresentation in community requests in those areas, and it would just be interesting to know why that is.
Yeah, and that was something that we sought to, answer as part of the analysis. And it's hard to figure out exactly why, but we did do a literature review, and they found that submitting community requests is similar to high-cost civic engagement activities, like, contributing to political campaigns, or turning out to vote. So it was trying to say that submitting a community request can be more time intensive than anticipated, or it's also possible there are language limitations, or other time limitations, or maybe just awareness limitations, like they don't know that the portal exists. So what we are proposing in our recommendations is to be more proactive, especially about messaging out that these channels exist. We've made it very clear on our website, but now it's getting out to the communities. We realize we have to meet people where they are, and we did pop-up events throughout the month of April in conjunction with our annual safety feedback. And we had business cards printed with a QR code and a website written down that explain, this is report a problem, this is what you can report to us, in terms of, it's very safety focused. So, if you see a problem, this is where you can go. And as we spoke with people in the community, we handed out the cards so they knew, oh, if I have a problem, this is where I can go to report it. And we really focused pop-ups in areas, equity emphasis areas, or for example, we did the Arlington food, AFAC food distribution, site, and a couple other areas where we're really focusing in on trying to get people that might not be super engaged or know where the reported problem is, but here's a way that we can educate while we're doing our engagement. And so we'll continue to do stuff like that in the future.
Commissioner Burrows?
Yeah, I just kind of wanted to respond because I've sat on a task force for the neighborhood conservation and also sit on Neighborhood Complete Streets Commission. A lot of that, the communities in those areas where you're not getting those requests are people who are working 3 jobs. There are a lot of other things they're doing rather than responding or going onto portals, as Christine said. So it is an equity issue for sure, and something that we're trying to address, but it is something that's just real life.
Okay. Anyone else? Commissioner Coleman, welcome back. I did see your hand earlier. Did you have something you wanted to ask or to comment? All right, not seeing any movement there. Anybody else before we wrap up this agenda item? Commissioner Theo, go ahead.
One other question, data related. How easy is it now or will be in the future to be able to pull in data from the speed cameras that will be in school zones as they are set up, and also from, say, like the 9 or so red light cameras that we have in the county right now? So as that data is generated by that system or those systems, how easy is it to pull in for Vision Zero analysis purposes?
We have not set up a direct system to get that information, but we do work with ACPD and data share all the time. We are currently working through the procurement process, but once we come out of that and we know more about the vendor and the system, we'll be able to set up some kind of data sharing. And we did commit to reporting on those items in Vision Zero reports going forward. So that's something that we will certainly figure out over the next year, and we will look forward to seeing in hopefully next year's plan. I'm hoping we're up and running by then. But yeah, we can certainly integrate that into this type of analysis in the future.
Anybody else? All right, well, thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having me. Have a great night.
You too.
All righty. Next on the agenda, I will be presenting on the Arlington Boulevard Trail Study. And for reinforcement, I have my supervisor, Allison Bullock, who's the Transportation Planning Supervisor, and also joined here tonight virtually, both are virtually, is Jim Sebastian, who is with Tool Design. They have been working with us on the study. And just bear with me, I was really engaged in the last presentation, so now I'm trying to bring up my own, so just hang on. I had this all figured out. Okay, there we are. So what you're looking at here is the report, the draft report that came out of the study, and I will explain how we got to this point, but essentially we now have a draft report that we're revising and working through diligently, and I'll actually talk through some of these revisions in the presentation, but I just want you to know where we are at this point. So we essentially started last year in February 2022 by soliciting the help of Tool Design and going through the background, and we actually met out a few times on walks along the trail to try to get a real good understanding of what we think the issues are, what we saw as some perceived issues, and wanted to make sure we address those as part of this. The Arlington Boulevard Trail Study, which is a very important connection, runs east-west through Arlington, along Arlington Boulevard, and it, in my opinion, cuts through a loop, a 16-mile series that's very important in the county as well, which is the W&OD Trail, the 4-mile run trails, the Custis Trail, and the Mount Vernon Trail. So you can see our study area on the screen in blue in the big map, and in the top left you can see the red circle or loop, and the blue line in the middle of that, which is what we'll be focusing on tonight. So how do we get here? There were several adopted plans that recommended trail improvements along the Arlington Boulevard corridor. And in the fiscal years 2022 through 24 CIP plan, $200,000 were allocated for an engineering study to just look at the trail to see how we can make improvements if they were at all feasible. So like I said, we started in 2022 and we are wrapping up hopefully within the next few weeks. So the goals and objectives of the study are to develop some design concepts for improving sections of the trail at points that are narrow, and it could be water. We want to remove some barriers, physical barriers, and then some perceived barriers to use on the trail and other obstructions. We wanted to identify some preferred routing on the trail and the associated improvements for intersections and crossings, not limited to ADA accessibility, meeting the expectations of the MTP in terms of trail widths, and providing direct paths and connections wherever they are possible. And that plan and guidance came out of the master transportation plan, goals and policies, the bike element, pedestrian element, public spaces master plan, trails within the master plan, public spaces master plan, and as Christine just talked about, the Vision Zero action plan. And I can't go much further in this discussion without talking about the collaboration we've had with VDOT throughout this process. All of the recommendations that you will see tonight, all of the segments along the Arlington Boulevard Trail that we will discuss are within VDOT right away. So it's important that we kind of frame this discussion around that very important point. So what is there today? It's the trail that we're focusing on, the project area is from North Jackson Street, which I will show you very shortly in the map, to George Mason Drive westbound, and then if you make the loop and come back east, back to the Jackson Street Bridge from George Mason, that is the loop that is 1.3 miles. The nearby destinations within the study area are the Jefferson Middle School, Fleet Elementary School, TJ Community Center, the National Foreign Affairs Training Center, Columbia Gardens Cemetery, several places of worship, and quite a few shopping and dining areas. So there's a lot within this small area. So now I want to talk about public engagement and what we've done thus far. So we started the process with a walking tour in June. There was a preliminary walking tour with a handful of us from the community and a few staff members, people who had been advocating for improvements along the trail for quite some time, including the Washington Area Bicycles Association, Chairman Slatt, board member, two former staff members who are also Arlington residents and avid cyclists who wanted to make sure they contributed to this effort as well. And after that walking tour, we had a formal walking tour, and some of the same people came back out, and we walked that 1.3 mile area and made sure to ride on bikes. Some of us walked, and make sure we could identify areas that seemed to be impediments to using the trail. And after that, we started with our online engagement by just asking the community what they thought the issues were with the trail, or things that needed to be improved, things that they liked, so that we can then expand upon that and see how we can make it better. And from that, we had a series of design concepts to come out of that effort, and two design did come up with some really good ideas. We then floated those back to the community with the community engagement effort. We had a pop-up, the online feedback form with all of the design concepts. And from that, we met with a lot of stakeholders, all of the ones I mentioned, VDOT, National Foreign Affairs Training Center, schools, and other community advocates to talk about, and community members to talk about what came out of that effort, and received all of the feedback that we could from the feedback form, and tried to synthesize that and then go back to the design concepts that we had to improve those. So what I will show you tonight has kind of a hybrid between what was in the first round of draft recommendations and where we are today. What I'm hoping we will get out of this is a solid set of design concepts, but recognizing that we're in the final stages of the draft study, of the final study is in draft, and I want to make some final tweaks to what we have so that we can then, as part of our engagement, publish the final concepts and the document and a presentation on the website for everyone to see, so that we will have a completed package to go to the board with and ask for funding for the next capital improvement round. And this is what I just mentioned. getting ahead of myself. So the initial feedback that we received, there were 166 responses. The themes that came out of that was that people felt unsafe along the trail. There were too many bicycle, pedestrian, and vehicle conflicts. There was not enough buffer between the trail and the travel lanes. It's not welcoming, it feels narrow, it's not continuous, and there are poor pavement conditions. Those were some of the main themes that came out of this. And so with that, we developed the concepts as I mentioned, and what you see encircled in red are some of the things that we saw that could be changed in the first round. For instance, you can see where we proposed a 10-foot trail in most places. We did receive some feedback. VDOT, as a matter of fact, was one of the reviewers of the draft, and saw that we had 10 feet in some places, 11 in some places, and said, unless there is a real compelling reason why we have both, let's try to push it a little bit further and have one or the other. So we thought 11 was the preferred over the 10. So we then modified the locations where we had 10 to make it 11, wherever it was possible, understanding that there may be some right-of-way implications and some other things that we need to work out. But that is the goal, and I think we can get there. And then in some locations, we have guardrail, some places we had Jersey barrier, and those were some things we needed to change based on what we heard out of that feedback. So you'll see some few changes as we go through this process that you may have seen. You saw something different in the draft concepts that you will see differently tonight. So what people liked after those changes in the from the initial feedback was the sufficient lane width. People liked that the trail width, excuse me, I have lane width here, but it's actually trail width is what we documented. They liked the trail width. It seemed to be sufficient. There were minimal tree impacts. There was vehicle separation, and the trail seemed safer. Most respondents said that there were priorities outside of the study area. This was an open-ended comment response form, and for each segment, people were free-form. They were able to say whatever they wanted to, and some people said, we'd rather see something on Persian Drive, or we'd rather see something in another location. It wasn't really a priority. So that was the first thing that came out of this. So those comments were there. But within the study area, some people said they didn't want to see anything change, that it looked just like they wanted it to. So that let us know that we at least did something right. Some people wanted to see the vehicle separation changed. They didn't like the alternative. There were several alternatives. One was a preferred and another one was a second alternative. Some people didn't like the other alternative. They liked the preferred. So that was also positive. And then minimal tree impact. Some people wanted to see more trees or more shading and things like that. So now let's get into the design concepts. So along the trail, what we did was break the study area into 7 segments. So the first segment you can see here is from Jackson Street to Columbia Gardens Cemetery. The second one is from the cemetery to Glebe Road. We're traveling westbound. And then from Glebe Road to Trenton Street, which is where we have a westbound off-ramp approaching George Mason, and then a final segment to George Mason, and then traveling back east from George Mason Drive, we have segment 5, and then we have segment 6 along the National Foreign Affairs Training Center to Glebe Road, and then from Glebe back to the Jackson Street Bridge. So those are the segments I will show you tonight. And in segment 1, which is from Jackson to the Columbia Gardens entrance, we only have one option, and that's to widen the trail from 8 feet to 11 feet. We want to make sure we avoid healthy, mature trees, and there was one tree we identified with the urban foresters that was dying, and they did not believe it would be around before the project even kicked off, the actual construction kicked off. So we were able to continue with the 11-foot template without affecting any trees in this segment. In segment 2, which is from Columbia Gardens heading west to Glebe Road, We have a preferred alternative, excuse me, to reconstruct the trail from 8 to 11 feet, just as before. And we do have a pinch point. It's these two trees you see in the image on the left. It's currently 8 feet. And the urban foresters were concerned that if we were to reconstruct the trail or add more pavement at this location, the critical root zone would be impacted too much and it could cause the tree to die. So what we came to was that we could float the trail with an aeration mat. It's a standard that is here in the county. It's the root aeration matting that we can use through that pinch point to help protect those trees. So we are still able to get 11 feet with some workarounds. The other alternative is to push through the 11-foot template and then at the pinch point, keep the 8 feet where it is, just to avoid those trees altogether. But the preference is to use the aeration mat. And as we travel west along this trail, approaching Glebe Road, as you can see in the image there, the trail is this black asphalt here, adjacent to the Glebe Road off-ramp on Arlington Boulevard. A lot of people were concerned about this portion of the trail and said they were afraid to use it. They're adjacent to speeding cars, didn't feel safe. People don't use it the way they think they should. We have a retaining wall there. So what the recommendation is to narrow the ramp from 22 feet to 16 feet to gain, because it's a 1-lane off-ramp. And it's very wide. So we're taking 6 feet out of it and adding it to the trail. And at the approach at the intersection, we are keeping those 2 approach lanes. And that seems to be the best option and really the only one that we could reasonably come to at this point. Also, there is a bus stop that exists today that is in the median. I don't have a picture of it here, but I can show you where it exists on with my cursor. It's here in this island between the off-ramp and Arlington Boulevard. And the recommendation is to move it from here to the intersection of Glebe Road, which means the bus would need to exit Arlington Boulevard, exit the off-ramp, and then cross over Glebe Road, traveling west to get back onto Arlington Boulevard. And currently, that's the only bus that would do that is the 4A, WMATA 4A, and it's currently not in circulation. Stopped running during the beginning of the COVID pandemic. So at this intersection as well, there is a recommendation to make some alterations to the right turn slip lane that's at Glebe Road. And in option A, you can see here that the recommendation is to close that southbound right slip lane that's currently there and push out the curb and allow cyclists to just travel straight across without the conflicts of potential southbound right turning vehicles. The other option is to preserve the right turn slip lane and provide some additional traffic control devices to minimize those conflicts. And as you can see here in the first option, it would be a longer crossing, but it would be protected also by a pedestrian refuge. And this green arrow that you see in the image for option 1, we're still making some tweaks for the final presentation, like I said, and this is one of them. The one recommendation was to have a longer crossing as close to the intersection as possible. Another recommendation was to bring the crossing up parallel to Glebe Road, which means the cyclist would have to turn the corner, stop, and then cross and come back. And so this green arrow seemed to be the happy median, well, both. It works. So we think that this is where we will land with the option A. We prefer this option over option 2. There are still some things we need to work out from a traffic engineering perspective, traffic signalization perspective, but that is our recommendation. And the big change here is once you're traveling, once you cross that intersection where the slip lane is, we are recommending that we take width from the on-ramp, Glebe Road westbound, and create a new facility along that off-ramp for cyclists so that there is a continuous stretch that a person would travel along without currently what happens is, and I will show you this for the alternative, the second alternative, you make the right westbound on Glebe Road, and then you make a left on Cathedral Lane to continue westbound to get back to Arlington Boulevard. This alternative keeps you on Arlington Boulevard the entire time. And with this alternative, you will continue along the 11-foot trail, and the other radical, it's not necessarily radical, but the other change that would happen with this recommendation is we would recommend the closure of what I consider a redundancy in the system here, where we have two off-ramps approaching the George Mason Drive intersection. So the trail would continue along, cross over the existing ramp, and continue up to George Mason. So the one issue that we're working through with fire is the width, because at this location, we would be narrowing the service road from 22 to 16. That was a concern for the fire department, so we would at this point provide mountable curb so that the fire department would still have the access that they think is necessary to be able to make this happen. The second alternative that I was alluding to, which is what we do currently, is we make the right from Arlington Boulevard at the Glebe Road off-ramp onto Glebe Road, and then we turn left onto Cathedral Lane. If we are not able to make that new trail happen adjacent to the off-ramp, the on-ramp, westbound Glebe Road to George Mason, we would want to improve the existing facility on Cathedral Lane by making it, converting it from two-way to one-way, right past the fast food driveways. So there would still be access to both the McDonald's and the Dunkin' Donuts from both directions. But once you get past the driveway for the McDonald's adjacent to the Cat Veterinarian, it would only be one way at that point. And we would narrow the road, widen the existing sidewalk, and provide a 5-foot buffer, a 10-foot trail and a 5-foot buffer on Glebe Road, and an 11-foot trail and 4-foot buffer on Cathedral Lane. So that's what would happen at this location. And just to be clear, on Glebe Road, we would continue with a 10-foot and a 5-foot instead of 11, because we do not physically have the space to provide. This was one of the only locations, one of two locations where we could not get to the 11 feet. So at this location on Glebe, it's still 10 feet. It's wider than it is today, but it would be 10 feet at this location. And as we continue on Cathedral Lane in the one-way direction, which is there today, we have two choices. We could either have an 11-foot trail with a 4-foot buffer, or separated bike lanes and a 14-foot service road. So those are the two options with that second alternative. And segment 4 is from North Trenton Street to George Mason Drive, still traveling westbound. And here, the preferred alternative is to widen the sidewalk from 5 feet today to 11 with a 2-foot buffer, maintain the existing lanes. This recommendation, however, does rely on the redevelopment of a church that is adjacent to the sidewalk today. And there is a for sale sign out there. So we do know that this is something that could potentially be a reality one day, but that is our preferred recommendation. The second alternative would be to widen the sidewalk to 11 with a 4-foot buffer, and remove a lane and just have a left turn lane and a straight through right turn lane at the intersection. The consequences with doing that, though, is that the queuing could back up onto very close to Arlington Boulevard, which may be an issue. And also, I need to mention in this slide, which was not a part of our study, but we do have the good fortune of having the George Mason Drive study happening at the same time, which is right at the end of our project study area. And in that study, there's a recommendation to make some modifications to the bridge at this intersection. So cyclists would cross over here to travel back east in our project in the loop. And at that point, today, what you would see are 13-foot travel lanes, a 4-foot median, and a 12-foot turn lanes, and a very narrow 5-foot sidewalk. The recommendation in the South George Mason Drive multimodal corridor study is to narrow those lanes to 10 feet with one 11-foot lane for bus activity, provide a 2-foot median, 5-foot bike trails on each side, and continue that 5-foot sidewalk, which narrows the cartway significantly, but increases the area for bike and pedestrian activity significantly, I think. So as we travel back east, in segment 5, this is the location south of Arlington Boulevard on the service road, adjacent to the National Guard Readiness Center. We have here a recommendation to continue the trend for an 11-foot trail and a 4-foot buffer, where an 8-foot trail exists today with a 5-foot buffer. We would have to keep the 8 and 5. The preference is to keep the 8 and 5 in front of 3 townhomes that are next to the Readiness Center, because there are some trees that are immediately adjacent to the sidewalk in this short stretch. And it's an 8-foot sidewalk adjacent to, you can see in the picture here, a fence. So we really don't have a lot of space if we keep the 2 travel lanes on the eastbound approach. So the preferred recommendation is to have 11, an 8-foot pinch point in front of these 3 houses, and then widen back out to an 11-foot trail with a 4-foot buffer as we cross over the National Foreign Affairs Training Center and install a median at this entrance to the NFATC site, because right now it's an enormous amount of cement that we think could benefit from some sort of pedestrian or some kind of median refuge that is mountable, because one of the concerns we heard was that large vehicles still need to get through here, and having something there might be a hindrance. So that was, we thought, a great way to appease that concern and still get refuge. The second alternative would be to remove a lane for the eastbound on-ramp back to Arlington Boulevard. This could be a bit troublesome for some because it would impact queuing at the National Guard Bureau. If they do decide to relocate that guard gate in the future, this might actually be the preferred alternative, because today what happens is cars queue in one of those 2 lanes and wait to turn into the gate, because the gate is right at the service road. So there really queuing happens in that lane, and if it's taken away, it would just be 1 lane of queuing. So for now, our preferred alternative is to keep the 2 lanes and have a wider trail this way. In segment 6, and you may see a familiar figure in the picture here. I don't know if you can tell who that is. Chairman Slatt. So the preferred alternative is to widen the trail here to 11 feet. As you can see, it looks a bit problematic because it's a narrow sidewalk, it's patchy, It's immediately adjacent to an off-ramp on Arlington Boulevard. And we're approaching the Goodwill site, which we just recently heard it may be redeveloping. So we thought this was another great opportunity to take advantage of what may be happening there. So the recommendation is to widen the trail to 11. And as you may not be able to see it here, but there is a fence that currently goes along the NFATC site. So we're pushing into that space a little bit to get the 11 feet. But we are working with NFATC on this concept, and they have been amenable thus far to us doing that because they see the benefits of an improved trail as well. So we are happy that they are our partners and at least considering the possibility of a widened trail at this location as well. The second alternative would be here as we approach to keep the 11-foot, of course, but at the Goodwill property, in the previous slide, let me just go back one slide. In the previous slide, there is a 5-foot buffer with the 11-foot trail. We also added a 5-foot buffer adjacent to the Goodwill site. So there's green space on both sides of the trail adjacent to the Goodwill site. If the Goodwill site does not redevelop or there is not that opportunity there, we would just have the 5-foot buffer with an 11-foot trail at this location adjacent to the Goodwill parking lot. And as we approach the final segment 7, we have one alternative at this very location. There are 2 parts to segment 7. In this location, the alternative is to widen it to 11 feet. There's also a bus stop here that exists today, and it's where my cursor is in the image. Today, if the 4A were in existence, a pedestrian would need to cross over the ramp to get to that bus stop. And what we're recommending is a trail, a sidewalk that trails along the on-ramp that takes you down to the bus stop so that you can just cross where you have protection and walk down to the bus stop. And we have the same theme with the 11-foot trail here at this location with the 2-foot buffer adjacent to the service road. And there is narrowing that would occur at this on-ramp for us to get that 11-foot section on the trail. And in this location, we've had the good fortune in a few locations to have other projects happening within this short 1.3 mile area. In the VDOT STARS report, which is now a smart scale project, there is a recommendation to close. There are 5 existing driveways along Arlington Boulevard and the cars back onto Arlington Boulevard here. VDOT's recommendation is to close those driveways, provide a trail there, and a separate facility for access to those homes. We do see that as the preferred alternative because it does provide much better protection for cyclists and pedestrians at this point. As you are approaching the Thomas Jefferson Community Center and a park that's here, this is the preferred recommendation. The alternative to that would be to, if for some reason this project, smart scale project, does not go forward and we're not able to do that, is to continue to continue the trend of widening the trail, maintain the existing driveways, and at the same time avoid a mature tree that is here that parks, the urban foresters within Parks and Recreation really wanted us to try to protect. So we are meandering the trail to go back up to the bridge at this point. And those are the 7 segments. The next steps for us are to publish the study report. We have those few remaining tasks to complete. This summer, I will be working on a document framework scope and initiating an operational and safety analysis report with the VDOT. I understand it's a lengthy process, which I will be undertaking. And then from there, we will have a package ready to request funding for the Arlington Boulevard Trail design and construction. And with that, that's the end of the presentation. I am happy to take questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ms. Obakoya. I'm just really happy and ecstatic to see this study get to this point with such a high quality design. We set you a big challenge when we asked the county to study this particular part of the Arlington Boulevard Trail. I believe, as we said when we were talking about this is the hardest part, so we should start with this first because it's going to take the longest. And it's a very constrained area. You know, it's the trail, or what the tiniest bit of sidewalk that we call a trail is always crammed up between, you know, a hillside and a big road, or a retaining wall and a big road. There's always a big road though. So this is, I think, more than a lot of us feared to hope for. And I think it's really great. I think I have two main comments. One is, you know, we have a couple segments here where we are basically relying on redevelopment. And I think it's understandable in both of those spots that we're doing so. I would love to see that alternative that relies on redevelopment show a better trail. I don't think, you know, what we have in those instances, you know, an 11-foot with a 4-foot buffer or whatever, is what we would, you know, design in a green field, right? That's not anything anybody would look at and say, like, that's like the ultimate trail. That's the perfect trail. That's what we really want. It is a reflection that this is a constrained area. I think, you know, when we have redevelopment, you know, some of those constraints go away a little bit, right? The building's not going to be there, and this, you know, this and that's not going to be there. I think it would be really helpful when we go to review the redevelopment that might be required for that to happen. If we have in this report a design that is more of what we would actually want. You know, I think you ask your average trail user, would they like 4 feet of buffer next to a busy road, or would they like 6 feet of buffer next to a busy road? And they would more. They would want trees on both sides. And, you know, I think it just helps with that conversation about community benefit during redevelopment if we're starting with what we really want and we can negotiate down to maybe something that's not quite that good, rather than having what's in this report be something that already is kind of compromised. So I think that would be my main piece of feedback. But I think this is fantastic. And with that, I will jump over to other commissioners. Commissioner Lynn, tell me.
Yeah, I actually have a question. A couple of the pinch points where, because there's a tree, we're going to narrow it down from the preferred 11 to less than that, which is fine. I understand that. It makes sense. But at some point, the tree dies. When that happens, could we have like a placeholder there that the trail that could then get widened and the replacement tree be put just off the trail so that we can have a consistently wide trail? It would mean it may be years from now, and I just don't want it to be forgotten and have that be as a real possibility, because trees do die. You know, they're living things, they don't last forever. That we could then eventually get a full width trail all along.
It is our preference that we don't bill for that 8-foot condition today and provide an 11-foot wide trail. And if the tree dies or not, we still have at least what we hope for. In this slide, I believe this is the one you're talking about, where we're showing as an alternative. I don't think it's showing on the screen. Here, to maintain this pinch point, this is the location you're talking about. Our preference is to install, at this point, while the tree is still healthy, an aeration mat and just float over that with an 11-foot trail. So it would be 11 at this point.
Okay, well, that's great. But I think there were a couple other spots where we would do a jog or something where we had to accommodate And was it narrower or just a kink?
No, we were able to keep the 11-foot at the point
Okay,
where we
great.
were to jog around another tree.
Okay,
It
thank
was
you.
a heritage tree adjacent to Thomas Jefferson.
Other commissioner questions or comments? Commissioner Bros.
As one who used to regularly run along this trail, westbound and eastbound on the north side, I like the proposals, especially in segment 3, which I find a very difficult, even on running, not on a bike. So really appreciate the work that's gone into some of these proposals, but and especially that closing of the Thomas Street section. It's very in it. Yeah. Anyway, thank you.
Yeah, I think that whole bit of closing the redundant off-ramp and all of that would be an improvement to that neighborhood across the board. Even sans additional new trail, that makes it for a very car-centric and weird little bit down there. And I'm very supportive of closing the slip lane from Glebe Road down to westbound Washington Boulevard, Arlington Boulevard. But I'm sure that's a continued conversation with VDOT.
Concur on all of those.
That said, I will take this opportunity to bring up to the Transportation Commission that VDOT is updating their bicycle and pedestrian plan over the next, who knows how long their process is going to take. But keep your eyes out for opportunities to tell VDOT that this is an important part of their bicycle and pedestrian plan, or at least should be. Commissioner Theo, sorry, go ahead.
Just a question for clarification, I guess. I noticed with the bus route westbound, the plan is to have the bus stop moved from directly on Arlington Boulevard to the ramp, and then for the bus to then cross over and get back on Arlington Boulevard. But that doesn't seem to be the case with the eastbound, correct? The
That is
eastbound
correct.
is still, okay.
But in both instances, there would actually be a sidewalk to get you to the bus stop, unlike the current condition, which requires off-roading. Anybody? Is there anybody who can talk more about the aeration mat? This is a new concept to me that I've never heard of.
I wish I could. I just learned about it myself. We actually found this idea. One of our urban foresters mentioned it, and we went to a company that was doing it, and we thought it was a great idea. And so we were scrambling for a section to actually show you all. And she said, oh, I found one in our standards. So it's something that we do have in our standards that apparently somehow got in there. I would love to tell you more about it. Apparently it's designed in a way that allows for trees to breathe and grow without any real impediments. I don't know if maybe Allison or Jim can speak more to that, but it was something that was new. Jim shaking his head no.
Oh, see,
and Allison too.
That
So,
question
yeah.
was mostly to try and give Jim an excuse to speak, but.
Jim, you missed your opportunity. So, but we thought it was a great idea.
All right, I think my last question is segment 4. Is there anything, sans redevelopment, is there anything we can, there is an alternative too for segment 4, isn't there? That removes one of the lanes. I think I missed it my first time through the.
So this is segment 4. The preferred is to keep the 3 lanes. The alternative is to remove a lane to get the additional width, understanding that there would be some consequences to traffic queuing, potentially, if we do that.
All right, yep, I missed that second alternative my first time through the deck, and so I think I'm good. Any other commissioner questions or comments? All right, I think that's it then.
All right, thank you guys.
So good.
And with that, that was the last item on the agenda. Do we have any other business we need to discuss?
Well, I probably have to ask Commissioner Bros if she's the lead on any SPRCs that are still going that I need to reassign.
I think I'm only an alternate for you at the moment, so we're good.
Okay, you're
Yeah.
not, I know all those Clarendon ones were,
Right. Yeah, I think I'm
you think they're done?
Done,
Okay.
yeah,
But if I
yeah.
see anything in Clarendon continue
Yes,
on, I
yes.
should probably check. All
Yes,
right.
yeah, thank
Joyce
you.
Motors and.
Joyce, yeah, I think we're,
The,
Chairman Slat, we have an LRPC the end of May that will have that Columbia Pike parking garage that'll be associated with the Career Center.
okay, yeah,
So I can get the date on that so we can have it on our
that would be
calendars.
great. I panicked yesterday looking at my calendar and was like, wait, do I need to be at Form-Based Code Advisory? And then it was not on the agenda. So
but yeah, you will need to
I
find
think it's the 25th of May.
25th of May, okay.
you'll need to find a replacement for me on Neighborhood Complete Streets,
Ah, yes, Neighborhood Complete Streets.
which is a great group, and they're only meeting quarterly now.
I biked past a under construction Neighborhood Complete Streets project on my way here.
Yeah, on 50?
Fairfax Drive
Yes,
and
it's a really
50.
great project, yeah.
Like, hey, that's a new sidewalk.
So I encourage anyone who's interested.
I can send out to you, I have you as lead on 2 projects.
Yeah, I
I'll
think
send them out to the group. I can tell you now,
they're both Clarendon ones, right? It's like Joyce Motors
I
and,
have Crystal Towers 3 with
oh, you're just,
Brosh and Hussein. Do you recall that one?
I'm the lead on Crystal Towers 3.
Okay. And then I have Wells Fargo Verizon, which is the
Yeah.
Clarendon one.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool, yeah.
And then your alternate for 2500, which is the other one, Wilson Boulevard.
All right, anybody else? Anything else? All right, then we are adjourned.
Next meeting is May 25th.
May 25th.
Yeah.